I think a lot of companies out there say that they offer flexible working. And of course, they kind of have to, right? There's some legislation around that anyway. But I wonder really how many do it. It's one thing to, we offer this and we're wonderful and we have these organizations inside of our company that support diversity and inclusion, and we have women communities inside of organizations, et cetera. That's fantastic and we need that. But how are you enabling that concretely and then also proactively?
Hi, my name is Nadia Nagamutu, business psychologist, coach, speaker, and founder of Avenir Consulting, which creates organisational growth and success via inclusion and diversity. We've been discussing the benefits that diversity brings to companies' bottom line performance for decades with more and more evidence. But there are so many questions organisations still have about how to achieve it. How do you create a culture where people feel valued for their uniqueness and the qualities they bring? I believe it's crucial to the future success and sustainability of every organisation that they find the answer to this question to make sure that each employee is not only supported but also appreciated. With this podcast, I aim to get some of the key challenges to creating inclusive workplaces out in the open and start uncovering the solutions to embracing a culture that cares for everyone. I'm going to be having conversations with some of the most inspiring people in different countries and across industries who are pushing the boundaries on inclusion and diversity in the workplace, from topics such as parenting in the workplace, ethnicity, age, gender, mental health, and all things inclusion. I want to create a movement to change society through sharing life experiences and creating more empathy and connection. Why care? I believe that once we have organisations and societies that accept and value everyone for who they are, we become healthier, happier, and better in our roles both inside and outside work. Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of my Why Care podcast. My name is Nadia Nagamutu, and I am your host. What are the barriers people, particularly women, face when returning back to work after parental leave? What should organisations be aware of in terms of the barriers and benefits of flexible working? And what's the next big thing for flexible working in this next decade? These questions and many more will be answered on today's podcast when I speak to our guest on the show, Sophie Smallwood. She's had an inspiring corporate career at the giants like eBay and Facebook, launching new products successfully through customer engagement. After the birth of her first child, she decided to quit her job and embark on an exciting tech startup, and she's now the co-founder of RoleShare. We talk about RoleShare and its mission to disrupt our understanding of flexible working. We also talk about some of the key factors that influence a smooth return to work after parental leave. Finally, Sophie Smallwood explains the policy and behavioural shift organisations will need to make in the future in order to sustain their competitive advantage. She comes up with some great stories and analogies which really resonated with me. I hope they do for you too. Sophie, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I'm super excited about talking to you for a number of reasons. In particular, because you're a new parent. Again, congratulations to you.
Thank you.
And I believe we have your daughter there with us today as well.
Yes, so we're very attached to each other at this point. She's just a little over 1 month. So she is also a guest on this podcast. We might make a few squeaks here and there, maybe even louder. We'll see how we go.
That's absolutely fine. Well, welcome to her too. I love your profile and what you put out there. When you were pregnant, the photos that we saw of you, real authentic photos, how you were feeling, honest stories of real life, parenthood and working.
Yeah.
Not everyone's willing to do that, are they?
I suppose I would say you don't always have a choice, but I was pretty open, and I am pretty open on social media about the fact that I'm a working parent and that you can have it all, but you've got to do so in a way that's flexible. And you might not be able to do it in sort of society's prescribed 9 to 5, Monday to Friday.
You speak to that and it's clear from all your messaging that that's what you stand for,
right?
Which I love. So this is your second child now. And when you were pregnant with your first child, you were working at Facebook, is that right?
Yes.
So I'm really interested, actually, the difference that in your experience. So from employment and working for one of the largest corporates like Facebook, compared to being self-employed when you were pregnant with your second child, what's the difference in those experiences in terms of how you were feeling in the lead up to taking maternity leave?
There's definitely some similarities, but some clear differences. So I think when I was at Facebook, I was part of a very large organization. And I knew that my role, in essence, me not being there wouldn't be the end of the world per se. They were going to be getting a contractor in to cover for my bits. And I would be coming back to the same role or something, within the same realm, in essence. When I was preparing to go on maternity leave, I felt quite comfortable and I was very excited around this new chapter, first child. There's a lot you can imagine, but very little you actually know. I also was very much thinking about, how am I going to grow in my career after I have this first child? Because my academics and my career have always been a big part of my identity and my self-confidence. And so having a child, I started to think about, well, how will this impact and how can I carry on growing? And so I started to have conversations around, where am I going in this role with some of our senior leadership? And it was all very positive. And then I went away and had my child and I decided to take a full year. Though I would say I was probably ready to come back much sooner, but I didn't because my role was a full-time role. And so I decided, okay, well, since I can't really do my role in a part-time basis, I'll go ahead and take the full year off. It's an amazing opportunity. Though my preference would have been to go back maybe 3 days a week, 2 days a week in sort of a part-time maternity leave. But that's not really something that's, I think, sort of readily available generally. And so I came back after a year and a lot changed, right? That's normal. A lot changes. Companies carry on. But for me, it started to make me think a lot about how much the organization had changed, but yet I still felt like I was in the same place that I left on when I went on maternity leave. It's kind of a sensation, really. And so the way it differs this time around is that, well, we're now launching our own business. We're in soft launch mode. And I don't have the cushion or the support of a large organization.
Right.
On one side, that's a bit more, I guess I would say, unsettling. At the same time, one of the things I really missed the first time around when I was on maternity leave was sort of cerebral stimulation. I oftentimes felt like a little bit numb, really. And so I would listen to podcasts and things that would sort of stimulate my mind and try to read as much as possible. But so that's why I really miss work, because work really challenged my brain. For this time around, that's something I have. I have that because it's our own business. I can pop in and out whenever I want to.
Of course.
Bits and pieces to keep me going on sort of the brain stimulation angle.
Yeah, that story resonates with me so much. When I had our daughter, I was in employment as well. In fact, at the moment of finding out I was pregnant, there was an initial kind of like, how am I going to manage this career that I've worked so hard for? I don't want anyone to look at me. I was actually worried about how people would then view me as soon as they found out I was pregnant, thinking that I wouldn't be keen to work as hard maybe or as committed anymore, that I'd kind of part switched off. And my behaviour, I think, was probably the opposite of maybe what some women are like. And people did comment. I actually worked a lot harder. I was almost like trying to prove that even because I was pregnant, it just didn't mean that I wasn't capable anymore or that I was going to switch off.
Absolutely. So true. I felt the same thing on both of my pregnancy experiences. I feel like when I left Facebook, I had an incredible performance review. I was exceeds expectations to get at Facebook and really left with a strong sort of legacy in essence before entering the maternity leave period. And then with WorldShare leading up to having my daughter, we were extremely busy. We went to Web Summit. We had speaking engagements. I did a taping at Facebook, just really sort of going 100 miles an hour because I didn't want to necessarily take a seat back and nest as much as maybe my family was recommending, because I'm like, no, I can do this. Like being for me is not a reason for me to take a seat back.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's me, right? For some people, there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that.
Exactly. And I think it is each to your own. But I do remember a lot of people encouraging me to slow down and, that I didn't have to power on and it was okay. And I guess people put on what they believe, what they would do in that situation, what they believe other women should do. And I strongly believe that actually every woman should be judging what they want to do, what's right for them, rather than looking around and seeing what other women are doing and what's the most appropriate thing to do.
Right.
So you mentioned there about returning to work after your first child, and obviously things had moved on. Was that the most challenging thing about coming to work after your first child? And what did Facebook do to make it easier for you?
So when I was at Facebook, we had a number of keeping in touch days that we had allocated, and I
Sure.
really used all of them. So I come back
Yeah.
through my maternity leave, and I specifically picked events where the whole organization came together. So whenever there was an offsite, because they were typically a really good opportunity to get a summary of what's been happening, right?
Hmm.
Highlight the most important things and the main objectives. So I came
Sure.
to those and I found that that was really great for me to keep sort of a pulse on what was happening without being overly involved. And when I came back from maternity leave, I took a full year. My role was the same role. My accounts, in essence, and the size of my accounts had shifted a little bit. So I think for me initially, but my boss was fantastic and she was also pregnant at the time and was extremely
Hmm.
flexible in sort of giving me the types of accounts that I wanted. So if I wanted to go back on the enterprise side, she said we would absolutely make that happen. So they were very, very flexible and accommodating. It's understandable that things change when you're gone. But I think the fact that my manager was extremely flexible really helped a lot. Facebook also has sort of a mentoring program for moms who come back.
Hmm.
So you will be matched with another woman who had a child, came back just as sort of like a transition.
Okay. Amazing. And did you take all of those opportunities then?
I did, and I was happy to have those choices. And I was very open about sort of my aspirations and what I wanted to do with my role and the types of sort of the level at which I wanted to come back. One thing that was the hardest, it wasn't so much the returning that was hard as far as the role and sort of how Facebook supports it, but for me, the harder things were the growth in the organization. So when I initially joined Workplace by Facebook, it was a very small organization. It was, in essence, an absolute startup within Facebook. So
Okay.
back, our company had grown so much. And so there's all these new faces, and it's sort of overnight, you're almost entering a whole new world. So the hyper growth was one of the challenges, but that's to be expected. It's almost like being a newbie in essence. And another challenge, I think, was that my core team had changed a lot. So when I left on maternity leave, my core team and I had a really strong bond. I, in essence, had been the buddy to everyone on my team who'd been hired. I was the first person on my team. And so in the time that I was away on mat leave, they'd all moved on to other parts of the world. They moved on to different teams. So in essence, my core team was no longer there. And so that was a bit difficult because you kind of want to go back to your safety net.
Of course.
So that was a bit of a challenge, I think.
And was that acknowledged at all? Because it is hard to be away from the workplace doing something completely different, having a completely different role for a year and coming back in and then finding that actually some of the known entities, things like your team members who you had good relationships with, it was a good performing team, actually have disbanded and now you're coming back with a whole bunch of new people. Was that ever acknowledged or addressed in any way?
I don't think it was necessarily addressed, but when I came back from maternity leave, we had a team lunch to welcome me back. And again, I had a really good relationship with my manager and I would have one-to-ones on a weekly basis. And so I would basically just express to her how I felt, but in such. So I felt I could have that dialogue. But on that, really, what can they do, right? It's the team changes, people move on. And
Sure.
when you come back from maternity leave, sometimes that's just a reality.
I suppose is that your line manager was crucial to feeling comfortable again, feeling back up and running, being able to share how you were feeling.
Yeah.
Important that she was a woman, or do you think, and about to go on maternity leave herself and could empathize more or not?
I don't know if it was her being a woman per se. I think, it was her first child. So I think similarly to me, you don't really know until you have your first child. She was just very empathetic and that's just her style, right? I think also that was one of the challenges. When I came back from mat leave, she left pretty quickly after to go on her own.
Right, of course, right.
There was a lot of change coming back. But at the same time, look, I'm really thankful that we get a full year here if we want it in the UK. I mean, you can tell from my North American accent that I spent quite a bit of time in North America. And the maternity leave period in the US is a joke compared to here in the UK, right? So
absolutely.
on one end, you're separated from your child, I think, much too early on in the US. On the other hand, you come back to probably an organization that hasn't changed as much after mat leave.
Okay, I see that. but there is something about the way that the UK operates in terms of holding the role for the parent for up to a year.
Absolutely.
I think there's not that many other countries, maybe obviously in the Scandinavian countries,
Yes.
obviously, who are further ahead in shared parental leave. But certainly from what I've compared in other countries around the world, we're one of the best.
Yes, it's absolutely incredible. I feel extremely fortunate to have had both of my children.
So do you think that that was a common experience for a lot of women returning to work at Facebook? A lot of the research that I've done always talks about the local culture or highlights how important the local culture is. The line manager is so critical. The team is so critical to this transition back into the workplace or supporting people who have caring responsibilities or want to work flexibly. So did you ever figure out whether it was unique to your area of work at Facebook or whether other people had similar experiences returning?
I didn't have anyone at Facebook in particular that had gone on maternity leave and come back around the same time that I did, that we could sort of like cross stories. But I think ultimately I had other friends who'd had children around the same time that I had. And they had similar sort of sentiments if they'd taken the full period, the full 12 months. And coming back was a little bit of a challenge, but for varying reasons. And a few of them didn't have supporting line managers. And so it absolutely is core to the return experience. And one thing about Facebook is Facebook as a whole has quite a strong culture, but it is very much the micro team culture. In essence, the team culture that your line manager instills that will, in essence, make or break you, right? I mean, lots of studies out there that say people join good companies and leave bad managers.
Yes.
My manager, who was about to go on maternity leave, was really core to making my experience on Workplace by Facebook a really pleasant experience before mat leave and when I came back.
Amazing. Well, obviously, we really need to talk about role share here because you decided then to leave this, what sounds like a really supportive and great place to work after having had your first child, to then embarking on this incredible journey and starting up your own company with your partner called Role Share. So tell me a little bit more about Role Share. What was the need to set it up that you felt, right, okay, this is the time I need to do this now?
Yeah. So before I had my son, as I mentioned earlier, I had this thinking around how am I going to do it all? How am I going to balance my career and continue to grow? But at the same time, now I'm bringing this little human into this world who doesn't have a choice. And I really want to make sure that I'm an A player across the board, right? An A player at work, an A player as a parent. And about 8 years ago or so, maybe even a little more now, I was volunteering in Los Angeles with an organization that was comprised mostly of women. Co-volunteers was a director of media buying at a very large advertising agency. She was mother of young twins. And I remember thinking, how are you making time to volunteer? Over the top. And I remember this very clearly, said, very lucky. I share my role another person. And I'd never heard of this before, but quickly realized, wow, this is an incredible opportunity because to carry on having an exciting role that's very strategic, very senior, while at the same time getting a lot of time back in the week to tend to her other responsibilities. So fast forward years later, I'm at Facebook and I'm about to go on maternity leave. This concept popped back up and I mentioned it to my husband. And he really liked this concept because he has managed people for quite a long time. And a few of his direct reports have come back after mat leave who wanted reduced hours. And so that's what they did is they reduced 4 to 4 days or 3 days. But he found that even though he did it, he found it a challenge for him as a manager because though he would accommodate the requests and they would work at 80% or so, he still had 100% quota. And so he had to somehow make up for it elsewhere. And so he said, as a manager, this type of working arrangement is phenomenal because I can give the flexibility and then I can get the coverage and help meet my quota still.
Absolutely. It makes complete sense.
That concept. And so that's kind of what started this idea of creating a marketplace. We both come from a tech background, having worked for large tech companies. So we like to solve things at scale. And so we thought if we wanted to look for someone to share a role with today and find jobs that are shareable, like where would we go? And we couldn't really think of any place truly that was sort of an open marketplace. So we thought, well, let's build it.
I love it.
And I thought, well, this is a really good opportunity for me to now move to focus on a startup where I can have high level strategic impact. I can impact the product and I can make a difference. Hopefully it's sort of now or never type thing.
Incredible. What a leap of faith is, people always say that to me when they hear my story about setting up Avenir.
Yeah.
And it is a leap of faith, isn't it? Because you write a pros and cons list, or, maybe not physically, but certainly in your head, like, should I do it? Should I not? But it's great here and look at what I've got. And yet there's this kind of exciting draw, certainly that I felt, to just kind of trying it, going out, seeing if actually this idea that I have could work, whether it could benefit people's lives the way that I felt it could. And so tell me, Rollshare's an app then. Explain a little bit more.
Web enabled. So we are a website at the moment, but we're mobile friendly. So it's not an app that you have to download on your phone per se, but we're a website. I'll call it, we're a platform marketplace, two-sided, where you have talent on one side and on the other side, you have companies. Mm-hmm. We basically are a matching site for people who want to share roles. So in essence, think about, dating sites out there, more concept, except we're matching individuals based on a number of criteria who might be good to work together. So some people might be very complementary to each other. Others might be more like almost identical twins to each other. And
sure,
I'm matching on those various criteria and then potentially giving them opportunities to apply for roles together. So that's the other side of the marketplace. So we're looking to partner with companies that are looking for more diversity in their workforce and in essence looking to open up their talent pool when interviewing for roles and such, to individuals who would not necessarily apply for a full-time role because they have other aspirations or they have other responsibilities outside of work.
I was wondering how that's been received. Have people leapt at this opportunity? Have you found this massive market of people who have been struggling to enter back into the workplace and find a career that allows them to balance their life outside of work? Was that what you found?
Yeah, so we're in soft launch mode yet. We haven't spent a lot of money on marketing yet. So all of our findings have been through mostly organic social media. And through all of that activity, it's been very, very positive. The people who need this type of flexibility, or just generally people who have been thinking about maybe scaling back hours, this working model really resonates with them because it can sustain a senior or strategic type of role.
Yeah.
That's one of the complaints that I hear from people who have done job sharing and maybe even did part-time previous to that, is that the part-time role, either one, was part-time pay, but really full-time hours, unfortunately, sort of came out that way. If it was a full work week, they would end up having to work on.
So common.
Or this other challenge where if it is a part-time role, a role that's been built to be part-time, some of the feedback we received, and this is qualitative feedback, but the role was less strategic, less visible.
Okay, so in order to work flexibly or part-time, they've had to almost take a step down in terms of strategic working. Those strategic roles weren't able to accommodate a part-time role. Is that right?
Yeah, in some cases.
Yeah. Just in my social circles, something that people just don't think it's possible to return to work in the way that they would like to return to work after having had children or a child. The organisation doesn't really know what to do with them, in the sense of the organisation seems to be, and these are the stories, not all organisations, but from the ones I've heard, some of them just are quite rigid in, well, this is the way that the job's always been done. I don't envisage you being able to do it any other way. So either you come back like this, full-time or condensed hours or something ridiculous where they really are working full-time hours but being paid part-time, or I'm afraid we can't make this work. And I've had so many stories like that. And a lot of women, they just either quit completely, they try and look for something a bit more local, which inevitably means not in their field or not in their sort of area of expertise professionally prior to kids, or taking a massive pay cut in order to do so.
Yeah, that sounds very familiar. Also, a lot of the stories that I've heard from different people that we've interviewed, also that are in the same stage of life that I'm in. And I think a lot of companies out there say that they offer flexible working. And of course, they kind of have to, right? There's some legislation around that anyway. But I wonder really how many do it. It's one thing to, we offer this and we're wonderful and we have these organizations inside of our company that support diversity and inclusion, and we have women communities inside of organizations, etc. That's fantastic and we need that. But how are you enabling that concretely? I'd say from a corporate perspective, when a company launches, so at Workplace by Facebook, this is my previous employer, but when we used to launch Workplace by Facebook inside of an organization, we would require our customers to do, in essence, an internal communications campaign announcing the fact that Workplace by Facebook was now available inside of the organization. Here's some use cases of how you'd use it. There would be a big launch event, right? So it was an enterprise tool that was being launched inside of the organization, and we really wanted everyone to know about it.
Okay.
There's like change management that goes with introducing new enterprise
of course
communication inside of an organization. So if you have a benefit like flexible working and you're an organization that's really supporting D&I and you're hiring people who have D&I in their titles, then are you also as proactively promoting flexible working models inside of your organization? Are you having flexible working week where people can learn about all the different ways of working flexibly and you're sharing use cases? I think that's what it takes to actually make people comfortable and give them the confidence that they can ask to work flexibly. And then that line managers are expected to support these requests.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not enough to have the policy. I think that's been proven.
Yeah.
Because whilst you might have it on your intranet or whatever system, or we've just launched a new policy with an attachment, actually people might not necessarily actively go and read it.
Yeah.
Secondly, depending on how long some of these policies are, they might not find the ones that are completely relevant to them. So, so you're still not translating or communicating actually how it can apply to people. And thirdly, they don't know whether actually it's just a tick box but actually if you do it, it's going to be negatively harmful to your career. What's the underlying culture? And I think I totally get you. If we're going to initiate organizational culture change, mindset shift, which then translates to behavioral change, the organization needs to communicate it. They need to live it. They need to actively support it and say, because this is how we work here.
Absolutely. And I think another challenge and also an opportunity with flexible working, generally speaking, is if you think about the persona of flexible working, I think most people's minds will go to a working mom. It could be standing in the way of making flexible working more accessible to everyone. And so I think if you look at Aviva, for example, Aviva have introduced a really interesting parental leave policy where now men and women both get a similar amount of paid leave, which is great because it's truly sort of this opportunity for flexibility. And so I think if we want to drive more flexible working arrangements inside of organizations, it's really important that we position it as something that is available to people without children, to men, and of course to, working moms. Because if it is just seen as a working mom sort of benefit, then by default, other people are going to, in essence, reject it.
It only builds resentment, doesn't
Exactly.
it? That I'm excluded and only targeting this certain demographic of people, and that's not fair. All the work that I do around fatherhood and equality in male caring, and so I'm totally with you, on this. Do you think that role share, though, is the main market will be women? Or do you think that organisationally or societally we've now shifted so that you will get more men or people with other flexible working needs coming and signing up?
I think initially, as with any kind of flexible working, the majority will be women. I mean, that's what we're seeing anyway.
Okay.
Some great examples of men sharing roles as well. And we definitely want to highlight more of those. But I think it's sort of a result of society. We still look at men as the primary breadwinners. We're seeing that that's shifting in some societies. More women are now becoming the breadwinners, but still there is sort of this notion. I think men still probably relate to that, feel like they have to be the main providers. But it's interesting because, also the generation that I'm a part of, like men are much more involved with child care in general. And so they do want more of that flexibility. I think a rise in that, we need to see a rise in that from all working models. Role sharing is a working model that's been around a really long time. It's not the most highly adopted working model because it's got the complexity of needing two people together to share a role. But on the other side of the coin, now we're in a position where we have technologies that didn't exist when this working model sort of first started to appear in the corporate world.
Exactly.
Technology now can help enable it at scale. We're not the only ones. Yes, men will be doing it. They will continue to grow as far as adoption, but absolutely women are the ones that I think feel more comfortable approaching flexible working anyway. I love the concept of remote working. I see remote working as sort of the Trojan horse of flexible working. It's the one model that's sort of still has progress to do. But it's the one model that I think more companies are accepting.
Do you still think we've got a long way to go then when it comes to encouraging a new phase of flexible working and the next step in flexible working, which is the job share, the role sharing aspect? Do you think organizations still see issues with it?
I think companies are not as familiar with it. There are industries where it's very prevalent. So in those industries, it's not an issue at all. It's more in the private sector where perhaps they haven't heard of it. They think, well, this type of role, really? How could you split a role that's a relationship management role? Well, there's examples of people doing it. So it's just helping answer the questions that are out there. And it will take a little while to get to a position where it becomes very readily available working model. But it's as with anything, if I think about Ubers and Airbnbs, I remember when I was younger, I was taking a walk with my grandfather in Switzerland. And just as a joke, I put my thumb out. I was very tired. I'm like, Grandpa, let's just catch a ride back home. My grandpa got very angry with me. And he was like, what are you doing? Never, ever accept a ride from a stranger. And look where we are today. Every moment of my life, if I want to, I can call, they come and pick me up.
Yes.
Strangers every time, right? So it's about aligning with companies that are forward thinking, who also realize that there's a lot of competition for talent out there, and giving those companies an opportunity to trial and pilot new working models, and it's just showing them that these working models are successful. I mean, every job share interview, I'd say 90% of the people I've interviewed who have job shared have had a very positive experience in the job share and actually were more productive and more efficient and output more for the company than they did when they were working solo in a similar role. I think from an activity perspective, these types of working models are a winner for companies.
It is amazing, isn't it? How societally we shift through disruption. We shift what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And things, decades ago or even last year that weren't as acceptable, suddenly something comes along, it disrupts our thinking, and there you are, we're doing something and behaving in a completely different way.
Yeah, it's also playing to your strengths. So people enjoy their work more when they get to do things that they're good at, right?
Yeah.
If you feel like you've been put in the right seat on the bus in your working environment, then you're going to be much more satisfied, right? Sometimes people leave companies because they were just in the wrong seat. It wasn't the right role, wasn't aligned to their strengths. So if you can just put people in the right seat, and sometimes, on a bus, most seats are, in essence, there's room for two. Same thing with the role share. And it's about identifying, okay, what are my strengths? Where do we complement each other? And in the sense, I interviewed this team from Microsoft who actually are client facing. They're both internal, partner facing, and external partner facing, and they had their own portfolios. So your customers would very much have a primary point of contact. It's just that in the days where you're not there, if there is an emergency and something comes through, something falls through, the other person who's covering the days could definitely step up and handle the issues at hand. From what I understood, that very rarely happened. And their customers actually were oftentimes very impressed about the fact that Microsoft was enabling this working model for their employees.
So it's a reputational thing there. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I totally get it. So, we're just coming to I could talk to you all day, all night. I think it's brilliant what you're doing with role share. If you were to choose one big thing that organizations that, you think organizations should work on and get right in this next decade, if we whiz forward by 2030, what should organizations focus on in this space?
I love that question. It's such a good question. What I would love to see is proof, in essence, that these companies are doing what they say they're doing. So it's not just on the companies, right? There has to be, in essence, legislation and policy that requires it. So when was it? Last year when companies were required to reveal the gender pay gap, right? So we need to have things like that from a flexible working perspective and for it to actually, I think, be upheld by companies. I think the companies that are struggling and really trying to compete for talent are not going to have a choice. They're going to have to think about new working models because
Totally.
The workforce out there requires it. You have the caregiving generation, parents looking after young children, and then those children growing up to look after parents. So the caregiving generations just continue to grow because people are living longer. Then you have the millennials that are coming in, and many of them are facing this sort of career ultra marathon. That's just the reality of their life. So flexibility is a huge requirement for them. They want career stability, but they also want flexibility. And then you have the aging workers who are also having to work longer because they're going to be living longer. And what happens? How do you transition them out? Really, that knowledge. So there's all of these sort of points of consideration with key populations of the workforce, and companies do not have a choice. They're going to have to adapt and change the way that they're working and the working models that they're making available to accommodate the expectations and the needs of these populations. So I don't know what I would say I would like to see, but it's more having more companies, in essence, state that they understand that this is a reality and seeing them actively promoting job postings, in essence, that's flexible. I think that's the big thing. And not just saying that, oh, we will consider a job share or we will consider part-time applicants, but actually seriously considering them, giving them a real go in the interview process and hiring them.
Yes, ultimately. I love that aim and ambition. I think you're totally right, where organisations just won't survive if they don't embrace this fully, properly, and not just as lip service, but actually hire people in role shares. I get it. Totally. So thank you so much. I'm really keen for people to connect with you and learn more about role share directly from you if they're interested. So clearly you're active on social media. That's how we met, but just explain what channels they can get hold of you on.
So obviously connect with me, Sophie Smallwood on LinkedIn, or we have a role share page as well. You can follow us there. We are on Instagram. We have a role share page there. And on Twitter as well, it's sort of the same handle across the board at RoleShare, one word. And we have a website as well, so roleshare.com. So pretty much every digital channel out there you can get of us on.
Brilliant, as you would expect from a tech startup. Amazing, Sophie. Thank you so much for today. I've just loved speaking to you. If anyone wants further information about anything that Sophie and I have spoken about today, then you can go to our show notes page, which is going to be on avenirconsulting.co.uk under podcasts. And Sophie, I've just loved speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time and sharing the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Nadia. It was my pleasure.
That concludes episode 3 of my Why Care podcast. I really hope you enjoyed our conversation. I loved Sophie's determination and focus on disrupting how organisations view flexible working. Those organisations that embrace role sharing will certainly be ahead of the curve in the fight for talent. Do let Sophie and I know what you thought of today's show. You can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter with the handle @NadiaNagamutu. As always, I really appreciate your support of this podcast through leaving a review on whatever platform you're listening to and spreading the word by sharing it with your friends and family. Once again, thanks to Morokenji for editing this podcast and to Christiane Gross for supporting with the show notes and getting it out there on social media.